in London yesterday, and so unable to do my usual slot. We'll talk more about that in a second. Thank you for joining me. So I do these every week, and typically a little bit later in the day, normally at 4:15 p.m. UK time, 11:15 a.m. East Coast, 8:15 a.m. Pacific time. We're a bit earlier today, so the West Coast probably will need to catch up with the recording, I guess. But as I was saying, I normally do these live streams on Tuesdays, but I was in London yesterday, so I was away from my recording setup. So I moved it to today, and I'm quite glad I did, because there's been an interesting new article out that, well, it feels like everyone in the SEO industry has been discussing, and it's super relevant to what I wanted to talk about today anyway, but it's also going to cast some new light, some new angles of discussion, and it probably won't, if you know me at all, won't surprise you to know that I have some opinions. So let me just start sharing my screen as well. Okay, so I think we're up and running. And the context of what I wanted to talk about today anyway was this idea of Google under pressure. And I think I prefaced this by saying Google's under pressure from regulators, the media, their customers, in my world, certainly webmasters, but I don't feel like we exert an awful lot of pressure on Google. But the rest do. Media, the regulators, the customers, all of those do put pressure on Google. And I'm interested both in the reality of the situation and in the, as the kids would say, the vibes. I think the vibes are potentially at least as important as the reality. And it's going to be quite interesting to see how this plays out. So I'm going to talk through my best guess and my kind of best assumptions on what some of this means in a second. But the article came out. It's called "The Man Who Killed Google Search," and it's about this guy called Prabhakar Raghavan, who is what's his job title these days? SVP of something or other. Should have looked this up before I came on. Describes Google search boss. So what is he? Reports directly to the CEO. Leads search, ads, maps, and commerce at Google. I think he's like SVP of search and other things at Google. And so this article has been everywhere. It was on Hacker News. It's been all over Twitter, LinkedIn, and other places. And I've seen a lot of different folks having different takes on it. And I mean, it's quite a substantial read. It says 14 minutes read here. It probably took me a little bit longer than that. I'm normally quite a quick reader, but I was disappearing off down various rabbit holes. So we'll talk about some of the background, and we'll talk about some of the substantial stuff in the article. It's essentially the primary sources are all of these emails that have come out of the DOJ case, the antitrust case against Google. And there's a number of people who aren't portrayed in the most flattering light in this article. But as I say, I found it interesting incidentally. So the URL, "The Men Who Killed Google," the headline is "The Man Who Killed Google." I wonder if that was a last minute editing switcheroo, and it was originally going to be about having more folks in this kind of firing line, particularly I think probably Sundar and maybe some of the previous SVPs, although actually it ends up being quite positive towards folks like Ben Gomez. But my guess is it was going to be Prabhakar, who is the primary focus of the article now, Sundar, and probably some of these folks leading the ads teams at the time. Although I think you can argue that they're just staying within their lane and doing their job. But anyway, it's based off these not leaked emails, these emails that Google had to disclose as part of the DOJ investigation. And I think probably the main thrust of the argument is, well, it's kind of twofold. One is that the barriers between ads and organic search broke down, and in particular, accusing certain individuals of breaking down those barriers. And we certainly see that in these threads. I mean, I would I would be shocked if it wasn't actually much, much sooner. These are threads from 2018, 2019 talking about the need to at least understand the effect of different moves on advertising revenue. I'd be shocked if that wasn't happening a decade earlier. Google has had this incredible march through years, decades of being a public company, showing quarter after quarter steady, standard, improving growth. And I don't think that happens by mistake. And I mean, there's been a lot of credit given to Ruth Porat, who was the CFO, I think, until recently. I think she's moved to a somewhat different role now, or even left. I'm not sure. I'd be amazed if that just happened. So I suspect these conversations have always been happening, but of course they happen in private. And spoiler alert to some of my views of where we're going to go later on, I don't think they're always a bad thing. And I think in some instances their impact is probably overblown, because as we can see, there's a lot of pushback within Google. As soon as you try and knock down these walls and challenge these things that have been kind of somewhat sacred beliefs almost within Google, that search quality is sacrosanct, I think there's a lot of internal pushback. So how much really changed just because somebody argued that they should, as part of this Code Yellow, DEFCON 1, I forget, never remember which way DEFCON goes. Anyway, the bad kind of DEFCON, that they should improve those numbers. I was going to say juice. It depends on how bad faith your reading of it is, as to whether you think they're asking for a short-term quarterly boost, whether they were asking for a sustainable boost that was possibly at the expense of search quality, or in fact, whether they were looking for the win-win. They were looking for the thing that was acceptable to search quality that also improved revenue. So that you can dictate that in a number of different ways. But anyway, we'll come back to these other resources. But as I say, the article ends up being a lot about this man, Prabhakar Raghavan. This article from 2021 by Stephen Levy effectively tries to call him the CEO of Google. It says he isn't the CEO of Google. Sundar being the CEO of Alphabet, Raghavan essentially runs everything that used to be Google, pretty much, and in particular all of the big revenue generating parts: search, maps, no YouTube, but search, maps, and ads, of course. And all of old Google reports to him, which I think makes him a very interesting character. I actually don't know a lot about him, but he does have this serious computer science background. So he's not a manager by training and historic trade. He's an engineer. He's written some seminal works of computer science research literature, textbook, I believe, and some quite groundbreaking stuff in information retrieval. So I think he's legit in that sense. So I found a number of interesting links. I think this was a link out of the original article, and Stephen Levy tries to call him the CEO of Google, or as I called it, the CEO of old Google. And I thought he came across quite well in this article. And admittedly, this is a few years ago, 2021. It was during COVID. One particular quote that I liked, it's a bit bigger, is he says, I think the real competition isn't Bing. It's among the people who are going to reimagine search, who'll let the user be far more expressive and who'll do a much better job than today. This is talking in 2021 before the release of ChatGPT, but he might as well have been talking about ChatGPT, I think. So, smart guy, engineer, researcher, making a lot of sense in 2021. How does he come to be the subject of an article entitled "The Man Who Killed Google Search"? Let's dive into that a little bit. But briefly, just to contextualize, I think he might be as you move up the Google hierarchy. So I believe Liz Reed, who we talked about a few weeks ago when she became head of search, I believe she reports to Prabhakar. And I think he might be the first person, as you move up through Liz, first person in the Google hierarchy responsible for both search quality and search ad revenue. And I think that's probably a very important piece of context as we think about these accusations and this kind of way of thinking. But yeah, so I talk. One element is about this willingness to trade off search quality for revenue. The other element is about the culture at Google, and we've heard a fair bit about this in a variety of places recently. It ties in to so many nuanced takes that have been coming out, and some less nuanced. I forget who the engineer was. There was an engineer who quit recently, who wrote a kind of LinkedIn diatribe on the way out about Google's inability to innovate. None of which, that doesn't necessarily spell the end of Google. Google is a behemoth company of hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue, hundreds of thousands of employees at this point. There's a lot of momentum in that. And if you look at the big company failures of the past, and I think history has a lot to teach us here, even failures like the decline of IBM, for example, take a long time to play out. So this is not about saying Google's necessarily on the brink. It's about, could it be the beginning of the end, or at least the beginning of a path that leads to some kind of decline over time. I don't know the answer to that, but this is, I guess, this is some of the question here. So anyway, I highly recommend reading this article, even though I don't agree with all of it. And just to call out some of the things that I found that I didn't particularly agree with, I found this one quite interesting. So that although this is in a quote block, I believe this is the author quoting themselves, or this is an editor's note essentially, and the code yellow that they describe is called the rumble of the rot economy. Google's revenue arm sounding the alarm, and this is Gomez the hero, Prabhakar Raghavan as the computer scientist class traitor, and it's interesting that the author here is critical of this description of one of the problems being there was insufficient growth in queries. And I thought this was quite telling. This is almost exactly what the North Star metric is for some car companies. Tesla has talked about this with self-driving technology, for example. It's not necessarily good for the world or for the economy or for the environment if folks drive more, but I think it would be a problem for Ford if people weren't driving as much as they used to. And so I think, yes, it is. It is a bit like Ford deciding that things are going poorly because people aren't driving as much as they used to. In this case, of course, it's conflating insufficient growth with actually a decline. But putting that to one side, for a market like Google's, stopping growing would be a major problem, and Google is continuing to grow as far as we know. But as I say, I would be shocked if some of this commercial discussion and commercial conversation wasn't in fact going on within Google at least a decade earlier. The 2008, 2009, I'm sure these conversations will have been had, if for no other reason than they wouldn't have wanted to be blindsided by what happened. They might be prepared to sacrifice some revenue over some time period in search of the North Star of search quality and organizing the world's information. But I don't think, once they're a public company and once they've been a public company for 5 or 6 years, I can't imagine them wanting to be blindsided by that. So I suspect they knew the impact of Panda, Penguin, all those kinds of updates that happened in that 2010, 11, 12 era. I suspect they knew and had detailed forecasts of the revenue impact of that. And the fact that we haven't seen those before is just testament to this will be a closely held small group of people. Obviously, it's market moving information, so it'll be held very confidentially. And we haven't had a case like this before that exposes those kinds of things in discovery. So I'm somewhat I'm in a different place to the author of this article. I'm not saying there are no problems, but I'm not exactly diagnosing the same set of problems as I talked about here. But as I mentioned, Prabhakar Raghavan is the recipient of this author's ire, and he's also been in the news in the last few days. I don't know if this is a coincidence, but for things he's been saying internally. So this new operating reality that he refers to, this is him at an all hands meeting, basically telling Googlers to work harder, move faster, and talking about how it's kind of a move to more like we talked about this before. I'm not a great fan of the language, but move from peacetime to wartime. And this question of whether Sundar is a great wartime CEO is a part of it. But zooming out, I'm really fascinated by a couple of big questions. I think one of the things is this question of how is Google really doing at search right now? What's happening with search quality? We can really only speculate from the outside. And I mentioned vibes earlier. The vibes are bad. And this article that everything I've started with here was discussed heavily on Hacker News, unsurprisingly. And that's a bit small, isn't it? Let me make that a bit bigger. The first comment is this ex-search engineer, only for a relatively short time period, relatively late on in this process, but talking about, so this is secondhand, this is somewhat hearsay, veteran engineers being upset when Ben Gomez was moved aside, and attributing actually the decline to losing Amit Singhal. So Amit led search until 2016, went to Apple, and this was, he was first off, did he go to Apple? I'm getting confused. John Gianandrea, who came in after Amit, was the beginning of the rise of deep learning embedded in the core algorithms. Google's obviously used machine learning technology in a range of places, and in particular in their ads algorithms, but had always resisted, Amit had always resisted, as we understood it, this creeping complexity, as Greg134 calls it. Apparently there's this internal document where he argued that they wanted Google search to be explainable, debuggable, and to be able to fix those small issues that pop up, which is very hard to do with a deep learning model based system. And as he put it, the older systems had obvious problems and bugs. The newer systems have hidden bugs and conceptual issues, which don't necessarily show up in the metrics. And I would love, if anybody wants to leak us a copy of Second Page Nav Boost, this internal document that apparently this Greg134 wrote before leaving. I'd love to read it, but I'm holding out no hope for that. But so this is my first big question. How is Google really doing at search right now? We know the vibes. Articles like this presuppose that search quality has got worse, and in fact make some claims that they made search quality deliberately worse in order to juice revenue. And yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious if that's the case, because we hear certain things from Google themselves talking about improvements in certain areas. I could easily, and this, it could be the metrics being misguided. It could be that, in fact, internally they're looking at flashing red dashboards around search quality. And to be clear, bad vibes is a problem, even if it's only bad vibes. And we'll come on to that in a second. But are these vibes matched with reality? The web is a more complex place. It's probably got more spam. It's certainly got all this kind of low and average quality content. And we're going to see more of that with the rise of the large language models as producers of content. So the task has got harder. Google could have stood still, could have got worse relative, how are they doing relative to the competition, relative to how they used to be, relative to the quality of the web at large, or in absolute terms. I don't know the answer to any of those questions. And I don't think any of these other folks who are writing about this do either. I haven't seen, I would love to see if any of you have a reference to any great research that tries to answer this question of, from the outside, of objectively, how is search quality doing? Because most of our tools are give us far too little insight into the long tail, don't really understand fast moving queries, new queries, probably look at the wrong metrics of user happiness and various other things. So this is something that I'm kind of very interested in, because it's just a pure underlying assumption. This whole article is basically predicated on the fact that search quality has got terrible, and blaming it on Raghavan, along with some very, very weird criticisms. So that there's a searching the article to find it, but there's a reference to this criticism: growth hungry managerial types led by Prabhakar Raghavan, a management consultant wearing an engineer costume. And as he says in the next paragraph, as far as we can tell, Raghavan has never actually worked as a management consultant. And I say this as someone who has worked as a management consultant. Firstly, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Sundar's a management consultant. We're going to come on to Sundar in a second. But Raghavan hasn't been, wasn't. And this is a very, very strange, I don't know, is this an ad hominem attack? It's a erroneous attack. Because the guy's an engineer, the guy's a researcher, he's distinguished researcher who's made real breakthroughs and published real insights and textbooks on the subject and things that other serious engineers have learned from. And this alone makes me find it a hard article to take as seriously as my emotional response to this is like, oh yeah, this is terrible. These people have screwed up the way that Google works. And as I've tried to unpick it more in my mind, these kind of definitely unjustified attacks, coupled with things that are taken as read but not backed up by real data, as far as I can tell. They may or may not be true, but these vibes around how search quality has been going that are taken as definitely true, all of this makes me at least cautious. So read the article. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Please do share them with me. If you want to challenge my thinking, I'd love to hear that. And if you agree with me, I'd love to discuss it more as well. So that was the first big question. How is Google really doing at search and search quality? Second question is, how good a CEO is Sundar? And this is incredibly hard question to answer. Stock price isn't everything, but it is a big part of the job of a public company leader. And this is a chart going from, so Sundar becomes CEO somewhere in the 2014, 2015 era. I don't remember exactly. And this shows the stock prices of, so this is Microsoft in black, Apple in blue, Amazon in orange, Meta in purple, Google in green. And Google is the worst performer of that pack over this time period. Hasn't been at all times. Meta fell significantly below it at the nadir of their performance. And obviously Amazon had the massive COVID bump that fell back and it kind of fell more in line, and has now kind of risen somewhat in sync. And there's just been this very, very recent divergence that we can't read too much into in the short term. But so there's this kind of clustered pack of, I would say, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft are all performing similarly, albeit with Amazon having this historic outperformance. And Meta has kind of caught up after a period of underperformance. Apple has just diverged very recently, but I think Apple's probably in that mix. Google, significantly worse, but still pretty good. I didn't plot the S&P on here, but I'm fairly sure that Google's ahead of that. And what's the counterfactual? Could someone else have led this better? I think for me, probably Microsoft is the epitome here of the just solidly well run. It's the highest performer aside from Amazon, which obviously benefited from the COVID bump so substantially. Microsoft is the managerial success, I think, doing what was that, twice as well as Google on this time. This isn't everything, and the vibes are very important. And I am going to be it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see what happens in the next few years as we see Sundar's vision play out. We talked last time about he's simultaneously getting these two criticisms that are in tension with one another. He's getting this criticism that he's a peacetime CEO and not prepared to make the hard moves, and simultaneously getting criticism for rubbing people up the wrong way, ruffling feathers with moves such as the one to put Demis Hassabis in charge of both Google Brain and DeepMind and combine that into one group, which is exactly the kind of move that is needed, I think, under his vision and under these kinds of threats. What it seems like he's not good at is managing the vibes. And if that becomes a problem, or rather that can become a problem all of its own, regardless of the reality of the situation, it becomes the reality. And so that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about this week, is what all of this means for us as marketers, for senior leadership at companies that depend on Google in one form or another, whether they depend on Google Ads, whether they depend on organic search, or obviously in most cases both. Because I think this is where the vibes are dangerous. I mentioned a quote, I can't remember who to attribute it to now, a few weeks ago, that the problem isn't whether AI can do your job. The problem is whether your boss thinks AI can do your job. And there is something similar here. The problem is not whether Google is a great channel for a business. The question is whether your boss or your boss's boss thinks Google is going to be a great channel for the business. And the reason vibes matter is it's not only that question, but it's stability and confidence are both important. So the question is not just, is it a good channel, but is it going to be a good channel? Is it going to remain a good channel? Is it going to be a stable and predictable channel? And this ties in, I've been doing interviews over the last few weeks with, or having conversations rather, with senior leaders, the kind of budget holders, senior execs, a level or two above our day-to-day points of contact at our customers. So at SearchPilot's customers, I've been speaking to their points of contacts, bosses and bosses' bosses. And I'm going to carry on doing this. This is very, very interesting sequence of conversations. So these are different industries: travel, retail, and hospitality, a number of different industries. I've had a range of these conversations with folks from head of digital up to SVP level and CMO as well. And there's been a few things that have come through that have really been making me think. We obviously, I'd say obviously, maybe you don't know, SearchPilot is a fairly substantial investment. And it's a very considered investment. We deploy into the web stack for our typical deployment for our customers. And so this is a decision that is we're often brought in by the SEO team, but it's not the SEO team's decision on their own. We have to get sign off from engineering, from product, from legal, from operations, from all these different folks. And the budget is typically big enough that it has to get signed off at the leadership level. And so I've been asking this question of, like, to the senior leaders, the revenue, folks who are accountable for revenue for P&L, what was it that led you to decide to invest in SEO testing, or to sign off on the plan to invest in SEO testing? And why did you pick SearchPilot? These are the big questions that I obviously want to know. And there's been a couple of interesting themes. So about half the folks I've spoken to have said that the final trigger was some kind of tough time. Some kind of tough time in the business led to a decision to pull the trigger and invest. This is when the pressure comes, right? So it's either a dip in performance, underperformance relative to plan, just stretch goals and being behind stretch goals, even if that's not exactly underperformance. And so there's some kind of gap. There's some kind of performance gap. And that's when the pressure is put on. So that's when these folks who I'm talking to are going to the channel leaders and saying, what are we going to do? We've got this gap of X million in our 2024, 2025 plan. What's the plan? How can we turn that around? How can we improve? And that's typically when the folks that we know, so these are folks with job titles like head of SEO, head of search, sometimes search manager, SEO manager, that kind of level, they're coming around and saying, well, actually, I've got this business case. Do you remember we pitched SEO testing a year ago or 18 months ago, and we decided, that that wasn't a go at the time. But this is my best pitch, and this is a business case. This is what we need to spend. This is our anticipated result. And incidentally, this is something that we at SearchPilot spend a lot of time helping our prospective customers put together, is really understanding, is there a business case for testing and for testing with SearchPilot? We'd love to build this experimentation program, but these things are expensive. How much reward can we all anticipate from doing this? And so this is a very common conversation. So specifically to this audience right now, if you are in this situation, so you're a channel leader, you're responsible for organic traffic and organic revenue, your boss is concerned that organic traffic is under threat, or you have a gap versus plan, this is the time to invest in this kind of solution, where you can put a business plan together, it can be accountable, you can show your boss the results that are likely to accrue to it, and it's the kind of plan that you can track against. So you can say, are we on track with the number of tests that we want to run, with win rate of those tests, with the size of those wins? So the final thing that I wanted to talk about today, apart from a couple of honorable mentions of things I've been reading and listening and watching this week, is that to be credible, these plans are often expensive. And this is something that I know a lot of folks in our industry struggle with. If you're used to free, very cheap tools, and you are used to thinking that your SEO budget is what you spend on an agency, right, which is maybe single-digit thousands a month, maybe double-digit thousands, so maybe 10K plus. Those kinds of plans, honestly, are going to struggle to move the needle for businesses that are doing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in annual revenue, and particularly in web revenue or even organic revenue. And so I'm going to be doing a bit more on this, but it ties into all of this stuff because the vibes are important. This ties into why folks choose to invest in a solution like us, but it also ties into the fact that I think a lot of folks in SEO have not had the experience of managing a P&L, of understanding how much businesses actually spend on something. So I just want to, I think I might have shared this resource before, but this is it's a few years old now. This is a 2021 resource from a guy called Ronnie Carvey. And as usual, I will share all of these links in the Twitter thread and in the LinkedIn comments afterwards. But Ronnie's an expert on A/B testing. Specifically, this is user experience testing, conversion rate optimization testing. And he runs this course that covers a whole range of things, but there's this particular module on buy versus build. And it's a wonderful course. And from what I can tell, I've only read the materials, but the materials are excellent. And he brings in all of these vendors into this. And so there's agencies giving their perspective, there's some brands, but crucially, the vendors come in. And in exchange for what is an incredible access to folks who are literally asking the question, should we buy or build this technology? They have to reveal certain things about their technological capabilities, their roadmaps, and their pricing. And all of these are very well known. This covers Optimizely is probably the best known. They don't actually disclose those publicly. I think they may have in one of the other classes. And obviously, they're in at least the middle, if not the top end of this range, or potentially above some of these ranges. Visual Website Optimizer is very well known. All of these are well-known conversion rate optimization tools. And they've been asked to give pricing for a website that is not tiny, but not the biggest in the world. Millions of sessions a month. Millions of sessions a month. All six-figure pricing, right? The very lowest number on here is $100,000, and that's as part of a $100,000 to $300,000 range. And SearchPilot is often in these kind of ranges as well. And this does not shock me. This does not shock me as in our business, which is not doing hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. Spoiler alert: SearchPilot is not quite that size yet. We're much, much smaller, right? 25 people, and we spend tens of thousands of dollars on tools like HubSpot to help us grow our business. It seems absolutely wild that occasionally, we hear that $100,000, $200,000 is an inconceivable amount for someone to spend on growing a hundreds of millions or billions of dollars revenue business. But we hear this all the time. And this kind of comes back to that, what is your SEO budget question, which I've talked about a few times before. If you're in-house asking that question, it at least includes your salary, probably includes teammates' salary. you can make an argument that, I mean, you may have an embedded engineer or data scientist, those kind of things. You've got analytics capabilities, you've got your product team, you've got your outside agency, you've got data sources, you've got all these kinds of things. Most of these teams are spending millions of dollars, if not tens of millions of dollars a year, at the absolute entry level pricing. Just 5 team members gets you pretty close to that kind of level. And so I'm going to do more on this about what does MarTech really cost, because this is just a CRO tool, and folks are probably, many of these teams are, they've got Adobe Analytics or some other kind of paid for analytics. They're probably paying a similar amount for that. Their Akamai bill is probably at least an order of magnitude more expensive, probably spending per month what they spend on those other tools per year. Their AWS bill can be obviously an order of magnitude bigger than that. So I'm going to return to this another day, but just remember that your SEO budget is not what you spend on agencies. And we should talk more about how to build those business cases. But as I said, the thing I've been hearing from senior leadership that ties into this whole theme of Google under pressure is, my worry for Google is, if the way they kill the golden goose, I don't think going to be by accidentally rolling out SGE, forgetting to put any ads in it, and cratering their revenue. That's not what's going to happen. The danger really is if it becomes widely thought that, particularly among executives, that Google is not a trusted partner. I think this happened to Facebook. The less so with Instagram, which was always a pay-to-play model, but Facebook, the blue app, there were so many changes, pivots to video. News is a good thing, news is a bad thing. All these kinds of things, all of the kind of reputation that Google has in everything except search, right? Killing Google Reader and so forth, just reduces that trust over time. And up till now, paid search has certainly been a stalwart, but I've been hearing more and more folks saying, yes, but as the price keeps going up, there's a limit. There's a limit to what we can be prepared to pay per click, because it crushes our cost per acquisition and cost per lead, or whatever, cost per revenue. And if that starts to extend into problems for organic search, where folks can't trust that the investments they're making are going to pay off, it's going to cause a lot of challenges for that channel. And this goes all the way back to not provided in analytics and the attributability of organic search. But so my message is, if you're under that kind of pressure, if the vibes are bad around organic search and you're being pressurized to say, how can you generate another X million in revenue from organic search in the next year? That's when you need to have that business case. You need to have it in the drawer. You open the drawer, you pull out the business case that you've been talking about in the past, and you say, here, boss, this is the answer. I did present this to you before, but in the good times, nobody was putting that pressure on. But now, if you're really putting the pressure on, you're really asking me, here's how we do it. Here's how we invest. Here's the 6-7 figure investment that you need to make to get that kind of return. And so if your boss is concerned that organic traffic is under threat, that's the time to pull that out and start having that conversation. Okay, to wrap up on something lighter, I wanted to just share some bits and pieces that I've been reading, watching, and whatever this week on the watching and listening has mainly been lighter. Is it lighter? I started watching the 3-Body Problem last night. As I said, we were in London yesterday with the team, and that, Fallout, and Shogun were the 3 shows that folks were recommending. Maybe it's the lightest of those. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know where it's going yet. I haven't read the books, so we'll see how that goes. And I wanted to shout out this reference as well. So Chris from GoFish is calling out a tip that he got from Daniel Russell, which I should have already known this tip, because apparently I texted Dan about it, and he said that he actually gave this tip away, embarrassingly, at Search Love, the conference that we used to run. So I was there when you did that, and I'd forgotten it. So anyway, credit to Daniel Russell. But the Edgar database. So this is the database of filings from public companies in the US. So the 10K, the quarterly report, the annual report, those kinds of things. And you can search it for SEO, for Google, for organic search. And you can find all of these great resources. Chris calls out a few of them here. So I enjoyed this cars.com one, for example, talking about sector leadership and the benefits they've had over time. And what you can learn from this is how leadership, and particularly this is even the C-suite, this is the CEOs of public companies, how they think about organic search and about SEO. And it's fascinating. I've been digging through some of this kind of stuff. As Chris says, no mention of backlinks, domain authority, EEAT, crawl budget optimization, obviously, but diversifying growth channels, growing market share. That's a big one. We hear that a lot. Market share, search visibility, share of voice, attracting audiences, customer acquisition costs, brand profiles. These are the kinds of languages that we need to be talking about more. And we've got, again, watch this space. More thoughts coming on particularly that kind of market share of voice side of things. So don't forget, I normally do these on a Tuesday. As I say, it's unusual to be doing this one today. Normally on a Tuesday at 8:15 a.m. Pacific time, 11:15 a.m. East Coast time, 4:15 p.m. UK time. If you want to know more, you can head to searchpilot.com/live, where there's links to resources. You can sign up to our email list and get get access to our email case studies. Let me just pull this up so you can see it. You can get our customer stories, success stories of folks who've had big wins with SearchPilot. We've got loads of those in different industries. If you're new to SEO testing, we've got a short PDF that can get you up to speed or that you can share with your boss. As I mentioned, you can sign up to the email list or just read those case studies. And if you'd like to see SearchPilot in action, the SEO testing platform for large websites, you can sign up here and we'll be in touch to give you a demo. If you want to self-serve on that and you don't want to speak to anyone, head to searchpilot.com/demo and check that out. These go live on my Twitter and my LinkedIn, where I'm Will Critchlow on both, as well as the SearchPilot YouTube channel, which should be pretty easy to find. So thank you for joining me this week. I will hopefully see you again next week. If you've got questions, thoughts, comments about everything we discussed today, I'd love to hear them. Hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn, and let's have some interesting discussions about the vibes around how leadership is seeing Google search. Take care.